Welcome in to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show today. It's Monday, October 23rd. It means it's a Mailbag Monday. We open up the mailbag. We field questions. A lot of these are geared towards this weekend, maybe some big picture type stuff. And one, I think there's a couple topics in here I was really hoping Eric would pick. I rolled through the questions that you were running through that you asked, and a couple of them made the list. So thank you for that. And why don't you introduce the first question?
Well, Matt, first off, what did I miss? Was there something that we wanted to talk about that we aren't talking about? We can pivot.
Oh no. I just the red zone offensive questions.
Oh yeah.
That was one that wanted to come up, and you didn't select the one of critiquing the offense, the criticism of the offense, but we went on kind of a rant at the end of the podcast on Saturday night. So it wasn't like I needed to talk about that again, but if it was going to be on there, I was ready.
You're ready. Okay. Well, we can always talk about that if we want. Let's jump into that red zone question you mentioned, which is the first question from @ScottMillion, #Autzen Audibles. What's your take on the red zone issues? Better teams limit explosive plays, which has been our bread and butter. The red zone issues are obviously prevalent right now, or I guess as a talking point, just because of what happened up in Seattle with a couple where obviously they were forced to go for it on fourth and they didn't get it. On the season, the numbers are pretty darn good. They've been in the red zone 37 times, 32 times they've come away with points, 27 times with touchdowns. Both of those are top half of the conference, not at the top, but respectable conversion rates. I think it just becomes difficult down there, and we saw this last year too, a couple of times. And this is the part of the field where good defenses make plays. This is the part of the field where good defenses make it hard on good offenses. I don't necessarily think there's like something super underlying there. One thing I will note that played into some of Oregon's success last year, we haven't seen a lot of this year, is utilizing Bo's legs, especially right around the goal line. Anybody who watched Sunday Night Football last night with Philadelphia, anytime it was like within a yard, it was like 100% they were just going to quarterback sneak it and take it. We haven't seen a ton of that this year. We did see a little bit of it last weekend with him sneaking, I think, on a third down play, and also obviously keeping it on a goal line run for a touchdown. So I think that's a component of it that maybe we'll continue to see more of. To the part about better teams limiting explosive plays, that's obviously true. I was surprised looking at this. I was thinking this could transition into Utah talk, but the Utes are actually right at the bottom of the Pac-12 in giving up explosive plays. They've given up 11 over 40. Some of that could be the caliber of offenses they've faced this year, but I did think that stood out. The only defense the rest of the way that's really good there is Oregon State. They've only allowed 2 plays all season over 40. So certainly there will be teams that are able to limit some of those explosives. Oregon is really good at creating them, but it's not going to be this week, at least based upon the trends this season. I'll toss it over to Jared. I kind of said my spiel there on the red zone. Are there things I'm missing in terms of what you'd like to see around the goal line more of?
I mean, I think it's just a subject of conversation because of obviously the Washington loss, and a couple of those fourth downs, decision making specifically was in the red zone. A lot of this, I think, comes down to execution. I think this is all I talked about basically after the Washington week. Of this was a good game plan, just poor execution. Good ideas, lack of execution, and that red zone percentage looks a lot better if Bo Nix throws a better ball to Trayshawn Holden on third down. If on the fourth down pass to Troy Franklin, that was designed to go to Franklin, if Nix reads it a little bit better and sees Holden over the middle again for a second touchdown, then that red zone look is a lot better. But these are all hindsight things. They're all subject to interpretation as well. But it's a lot easier to call it out after the fact. And I'm going to try not to do that and just go with whatever Oregon has done already in the red zone. They're actually operating at a higher level than they did last year in the red zone. They're converting at 86.5%, 23. Last year was 84.29. I remember this conversation we had about this team and the red zone deficiencies last season. Um, their number of red zone opportunities is probably going to be smaller than the average team, just because they're going to score from farther away. Um, they went 4 for 4 in the red zone against Washington State. I don't really have any issues with their red zone offense. I think they're fine. I think they do the job. I think that they're going to score more points from outside the red zone than more than anything else. Um, and like Eric, like you said, it does get harder in the red zone. There's just way less room to work with. And a lot of that goes into Oregon's offense, where they get balls in space to receivers. That's Will Stein's like main thing. It's like, hey, we got all these good players. Let's give them the ball in space, see what they can do. And the red zone, there's just not as much space. So it gets harder, but they've got a good offensive line. I just think it's kind of the talk of the town because of the decisions at Washington and some missed field goals here and there that don't make it look better.
The explosion plays question, because I don't need to talk about the red zone one. Oregon's an explosion play is 15 yards or more on the ground and 20 or more yards through the air. And from just a opponent longest yard, 20 or more from scrimmage plays this season, Oregon is 21st in the country. And I think last year's defense was viewed in a window of they were really good. They didn't give up explosion plays. They were they made their opponents basically go down the field and beat them, right? Like that's the general view of what Oregon's defense was like last season. Well, guess what? The percentages of explosion plays allowed per game is the exact same from this season to last season. So like they're right there. And I just think this is a byproduct of look at the teams that you have played this season through the first half of the year. Washington State, Colorado, and Washington. Like those are teams that are going to create big plays. You disagree, Jared?
No. I just thought I thought the question was about Oregon's Oregon's downfield offense compared to upcoming defenses that they're going to play and how that was going
I interpret this as
limit them.
Okay, well, same thing. Oregon's explosive plays don't have issues. Like they're why does it matter if your offense is producing the highest scoring offense in the country? It's generating some of the most yards in the country per game perspective. Why does it matter if it has to come through one play or three plays? Oregon's offense is good enough to score 50-something points a game or thereabouts. I can't remember what the updated number is, but I don't think there's issues with the offense right now. I mean, we can gripe about the red zone, efficiency or maybe the lack of execution, sure. But the overall premise from my perspective of the offense is this is a really good offense. They're number 2 in the country in scoring. Total offense, they're number 2 in the country. They move the ball. They score touchdowns. And they do it in a balanced way. There's not really a ton to gripe about, in my opinion. Like, could they be better? Absolutely. But they're clearly one of the best offenses in the country. And I don't think these games, they've never put themselves in a position where, boy, like how many times this season, or really in Dan Lanning's era, where have you gone into a game and been like, boy, I don't know if Oregon is going to be able to move the football. Like, even when Bo Nix got hurt against Washington and came back the next week against Utah, you were like, okay, they maybe won't have the run game, but they're going to have the passing attack. They'll still be able to move the football somewhat. There has been zero concern in my mind going into any game, maybe outside of Georgia, where you're like, this team's not, scoring 17 points is going to be hard for this team. Where the last head coach, multiple times, multiple games, you saw 3 or 4 straight punts by an offense. Has Dan Lanning take away the Georgia game, because that Georgia team was just special. Has an Oregon team under Dan Lanning had a game where they've punted 4 times in a row?
Not that I specifically remember.
Yeah. So
It's certainly not this year.
this offense is
Yeah.
really, really good, and we're just nitpicking at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. They're multiple, which gives them a lot of benefits. Washington State took away their deep shot attack. They only connected on 1 or 2, I guess, explosive pass plays, but Bo Nix still threw for like 300 yards. They still almost collected like 550 yards of total offense, 541 for the second straight game. Like they're not going to have a problem. I think the Oregon State game is going to provide difficulties just because that's a good secondary. Their secondary, their cornerbacks are a bit small, but with Troy Franklin should have an advantage there. But that's a good secondary. It's a good overall defense. I think Utah's going to provide some issues, even though they are last in the Pac-12 and those 40-yard explosive plays, which I thought was really interesting. But it's Utah. It's always going to be a good defense. It's always going to provide a lot of difficulties, even though this Oregon offense is really humming. Kind of goes to the quick start question that I'm sure we're going to get to later in the show.
Yeah, and to the Utah defense part, I mentioned the explosive plays. This is one of the better red zone defenses in the conference, though. Kind of crazy. They've only faced 15 red zone trips in 7 games this season. That speaks to how good they play over there. And only 7 of those 15 trips have gone for opposing touchdowns, 11 total for score, so 4 field goals mixed in. Utes are tough, and in Salt Lake, that's another part of this too. If you want to be real, is we talk about execution, maybe having issues down there. Well, where have they had execution issues? It's been in road games. You think about the way they opened
right
this last time up at Washington with those problems. At Tech, they didn't exactly punch it in with the same level of consistency in terms of converting red zone trips into touchdowns. Stanford game was just wonky. Those wasn't about red zone. They just couldn't get the ball moving. And once they did get the ball moving, it worked. But 2 of the 3 games this year where you've seen, I guess, kind of some red zone problems, it's been on the road. So I think Rice-Eccles is going to be, won't be Husky Stadium maybe, but it's kind of on that same tier to me in terms of just tough road environments in this conference. Most years, maybe it would be. I think this year, with kind of all that was on the line in the Oregon-Washington series, like that was Husky Stadium at its best. If Rice-Eccles Stadium's at its best, it's right there with Husky Stadium.
It's
right
comparable.
There with right there with Autzen, right there with those stadiums is the best in this conference right now. So we'll see if that plays a role too. Is just the road environment. I guess that's something to keep an eye on. And if they come out of this game and I think they're going to win this football game. But let's say in this hypothetical they lose because they do go 2 for 6 in red zone trips and they miss some field goals or they get stopped on 4th down. Revisiting this question makes a lot more sense to me right now. It feels kind of like an isolated instance with the Washington game kind of being the focal point. All right, second one from @DuckFanDan. How does Utah announcing that Cam Rising is out for the season affect Oregon's preparation for this big road game? How can Oregon start faster when playing in a tough environment? #Autzen Audibles. As Jared kind of hinted at, we are going to jump right into that part. Really quickly, the Cam Rising thing. I was kind of surprised that we got, I think even Whittingham kind of acknowledged like he wasn't sure he was going to bring this up at this point in the season. But after a big win on the road over USC, to announce your quarterback, who's been kind of the big question mark around that program the entire season, 7 weeks into the season, to kind of finalize that's certainly not insignificant. Bryson Barnes, though, man, like that guy's a gamer. Like you can't count them out. The fact that what he was able to do on that last drive with his legs kind of made up for some strange clock management there. But certainly significant. Cam Rising's been the quarterback 2 years in a row now that the conference champions, and the year before the conference added all of these, premier transfers, he was the first team all conference quarterback back in 21. So obviously a guy who can play. Oregon fans know that full well from their last 3 games facing the Utes and how difficult that has been. Not having him on the field will be strange to a certain degree, certainly significant. I'm going to guess that Oregon wasn't going to spend an incredible amount of time preparing for the possibility of Rising play just because he hadn't played in 6 previous weeks. And you kind of know what you've got coming up here. So, but good on the Utes for, this is pretty darn impressive if you just want to just off the cuff, like this part of the season, the way they performed without their quarterback and really with pretty mixed quarterback play. And last game with Barnes was by far the best quarterback play they've had all season.
Mhm.
You can't count out the Utes even without being full strength, and they certainly aren't that right now.
Yeah, I don't think Oregon was really preparing for Rising. Um, it's just been a very strange story with Rising and how Utah has handled it. Like the Athletic article when Cam Rising finally came out and talked about his injury, where he went into all the details of what it was like and what he actually tore, and then the Athletic article with his doctor, and the doctor's like, yeah, no, this is like a 12-month recovery, and he tore his ACL in January in the Rose Bowl, and then all off season, Utah's like, well, you never know, he could be ready for August, and then clearly now he's out for the year. It's just been a very strangely handled situation, but Barnes has done well. Like Eric said, he had his best game of the season against USC, 235 yards, 3 tuts. He only has 4 in the season, and the last one before that came in week 1 against Florida, where I believe it was the first play of the season where he scored, first or second play of the season where he scored like a flea flicker touchdown against Florida for the first touchdown. So it's been a minute since they've scored a passing touchdown, or at least Barnes has scored a passing touchdown. I'm gonna move on to the second part of this question of like how Oregon starts fast in Utah. Um, just play their game. Look, it's going to be a very difficult environment. We just talked about that. Rice Eccles in 21, the last time they were there, didn't end great. They did not start fast in that game. I think they were honestly, completely just outmanned at that point. A lot of wide receiver injuries during that time, and Anthony Brown just, had to go to Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin as true freshmen, Devin Williams going in there. Just a kind of a mess of an offensive game plan. But in order to start fast, this is an opportunity for them to showcase just how good their offense is, because this is a great Utah defense. We talked about it as well. We'll talk about it more this week. They have to stick to their script. And regardless if they don't start fast, I think Oregon's defense is going to be able to hang. This might be like last year's game against Utah, where it's in the 20s, and I don't think anybody's really going to come close to scoring like 40 points in this one. That's why the over-under's like 49.5. Like, I don't think a lot of people expect there to be a high-scoring profile in this game. But I think Oregon, if they just follow their script, they follow their game plan, they practice for the noise environment, which I'm sure they will, I think they'll get off to a hot start. It's just, can a couple of these passes that go incomplete, like against Stanford, where a Bo Nix throw deep to Tez Johnson goes over his head, like that lands in his breadbasket, it's a lot better of an offensive start. So some of it's just luck of the draw, but I think sticking to their game plan is what's going to make them get off to a hot start more than anything else.
Cam Rising's been out all year. I think they've known this, and they've just they didn't really want to talk about it, and they just did a really poor job of messaging. It was a really weird deal.
Yeah.
Now, how does that change anything? Like, nothing. I mean, but that being said, people are going to look at Utah's schedule and go, "Oh wow, they figured things out." They put up 34 against California 2 weeks ago, and then last weekend at USC they put up 34 again. Barnes had clearly his best performance, but they also played two of the worst defenses in the country. USC's 107th, Cal's 89th. They didn't play anybody of significance. Now, their schedule, they've done a heck of a job, and I'm not trying to disparage them at all, because to be 6-1 and 13th in the country and all the injuries that they have is pretty damn impressive. It speaks to the culture and the program that Whittingham has built. But they've also got a 7-point win at Baylor. They've got a 7-point win against UCLA and a 2-point win against USC. Any one of those goes the other direction, we're looking at a totally different record. We're looking at a totally different game in this one. Now that they've won, Utah's defense historically has been good. But like what Eric said earlier in the podcast, like they've got some leaks, and probably a lot of this is from just the pure craziness of the volume of injuries that they have suffered, on both sides of the football. But defensively, they've lost some dudes, and important guys. So like I kind of think this game's going to hit the over unless Oregon's defense plays lights out and limits Utah significantly from moving the football. I don't think Oregon's going to put up 50 or 45, but in the 30s feels very realistic for Oregon right now. I think they're a much better offense than USC, and SC had 32 points and turnovers and poor execution, and they still had big scores. I think Oregon can get to 32 points as long as they're healthy. What leads to that? It's the scripted plays that Oregon does in the first quarter. Execute those well. Hit a deep shot or two if you take them. And I almost think, like Eric and I were talking about this during the game against Washington State, like they weren't really trying to run the football against the Cougars. They just kept trying to throw. And then they finally figured out, oh, wow, let's run the football. Like, I know Utah's good against the run, but go to your bread and butter. Doug Howler of The Athletic, who covers ASU, tweeted after the ASU pick 6 to win, for Washington to win the game. Like, something he said at that moment was, I didn't understand why ASU went away from what they were really good at, and that's Scatterboo. And for Oregon, their offense is really good at running the football. And Bo Nix is a tremendous quarterback. He's a Heisman candidate, and you need to sprinkle in the runs, or the pass. But your bread and butter last season and this season has been your run game. And if they stick to the run game, I think that opens up everything else, and which should lead to a hot start for Oregon. But it all comes down to execution. I mean, they've had their chances in games previously. Bo Nix has missed a couple deep throws. Stanford was one in which he just didn't hit, and they could have had 2 touchdowns if that played out that way. Instead, they didn't, and they trailed 6-0 at the end of the first quarter. But it's just going to come down to execution.
Yeah, and avoiding penalties feels critical too.
Yeah.
This last game in particular, you saw some kind of the reemergence of some offensive line issues in terms of illegal men downfield, some false start stuff, which you don't like seeing at home. Obviously, road game in Salt Lake is going to provide some challenges there. This is one where you do want to get off to a quick start too, just because if you think about how you want the game script to go, Utah, you'd much rather be playing with the lead against the Utes than from behind. If you're playing out of a hole against that team, I know that we're going to get to a question right now talking about the run game, but even with a real rash of injuries in the backfield, like the Utes are still able to manufacture a run game. So this is not a team you want to fall behind, because if you can put the pressure, think about this USC game and what Utah was able to accomplish there. If you can create a 14-point lead and force Bryson Barnes to come back, obviously what he did in that last minute against USC, super impressive. But that's the script to win, is what you saw happen with Oregon State against Utah, where the Beavers were able to play with that advantage, and the Utes really struggled to play from behind. All right, third one from @GrizzleMuffin, great name. How do you think Lanning and Lufoy game plan to stop Jackson and Vaki for Utah? Watching the USC game, those two were a killer 1-2 combo. Autzen Audibles. I thought we had to talk about Sione Vaki in this podcast at least a little bit.
That's fine. Yeah,
this is crazy. It's crazy what he's done. This is a converted defensive back who's, like, we talked about Bucky Irving and maybe his candidacy for a Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Week. Like, Vaki's probably one of the guys he has to contend with just because of the way he's performed and making it look so natural as a defensive back the last 2 weeks, playing offense, being one of Utah's primary running backs, running for more than 100 yards in the game prior to this last week. And then this game against USC, having the long catch down the sideline for the touchdown, catching another for a touchdown. The footwork he had there, the change of direction, like, it's pretty cool seeing a defensive player move over and have so much of an impact. And for the Utes and Whittingham, it just feels par for the course of one man down, they find a way to manufacture something else. So it's kind of been the story of their season encapsulated there. To the question specifically about slowing those two down, like Oregon's defensive line needs to get off blocks. The Utes are big and strong, especially in the interior. They've dealt with some injuries at tackle. Jackson is a physical runner. He's a big physical guy. He is that kind of prototypical Utah running back that they always seem to have one or two of these guys. Just these big, get them, between the line of scrimmage, and they're going to fall forward for 3 to 5 yards basically every time. And Vaki shows a little bit of that, but he shows a lot of burst, and that guy is super versatile. And I would be curious when we talk with our Ute reporter Steve Bartle later this week, if kind of what the backstory is, learn more about him, but also like I wonder if this is just where he sticks for his career, because through 2 weeks, I know it's a little premature.
It's nine yards a carry, man.
Looks pretty good.
Yeah, that's all right. That'll do.
He's also playing 65 snaps on defense. I mean,
yeah.
So it's not. I mean, it's not like he's just switched positions because he wasn't playing defensively. He's playing both ways.
No, they just need running backs. It's been I don't know if we talked about it on this podcast, but guys, they've had 8, 9 players all go down with an injury, a season-ending injury, all impactful guys. Barton was the most recent one. Lander Barton, their linebacker. Obviously, Cam Rising, Brant Keithy, old friend Micah Pittman. He's out for the season with an injury. Logan Fano, their defensive end, is out for the season with an injury. Then they lost 2 running backs. So this is Kyle Whittingham. Yeah, no, it's a beat-up team, and it's no surprise here, but a wonderful coaching job from Kyle Whittingham. Probably the best coach in the Pac-12. And for their running back duo, Jaquinta Jackson, and honestly, if I'm Oregon, I'm more worried about Nate Johnson at quarterback. Every time I watch that guy, every time he plays, and they rotate him in, it's kind of similar to what for those listening or watching, it's kind of similar to what Stanford did for the first half of the game, where they would rotate some guys in and out at quarterback specifically. But Johnson is an electric athlete from the quarterback position. And he's been kind of dinged up, and Bryson Barnes has taken a kind of a bigger role recently in the Utah offense. But if Johnson is healthy, like he's going to be very tough. It's a lot of RPOs with him. It's a lot of runs outside the tackle, some bootlegs, just some naked bootlegs too, where it's like, we're just going to run this time around with Johnson. And I really like his play, but stopping Jaquinta Jackson is going to be a tall order. 6'2", 229-pound running back, one of my favorite running backs in the league. He's just an absolute moose back there, bowling people over. Oregon's defense has been pretty good against the run. There's been moments where it kind of seems like that could be a potential issue down the line. And I think we're going to find that out this weekend, if it is a potential issue. Because if Utah gets a grasp of this defense and says, oh, wow, we can run on them, they're going to run. They're not even going to think about throwing. And we'll just have to see if Oregon's defensive line holds up to it. I mean, they have the dudes to do it. They have a plethora of dudes, but it's been inconsistent at points. Teams have gone away from it, like Washington during the Washington game. Seemed like they were getting good success going off tackle on Oregon's defense, which I think is the epitome of the weak point in the run D. And then they started to go away from it on those back-to-back 3 and outs. I don't think they ran the ball even once. Just 3 straight passes both times. So I don't expect Utah to go away from whatever is working, because they don't really have a choice to go to anything else. If something is working, like that's what they're going to go do. So I'm interested to see that, and it's just going to be a really tough trio of people to stop. Even Bryson Barnes is good on the ground, so it's going to be a lot of run. This could be a very, very quick game.
Yeah, I mean, to stop Utah, you have to make them one-dimensional, and the one dimension you have to take away is the run game. And you do that, and you make Barnes throw the football, or if it's Nate Johnson, throw the football. More often than not, you're going to limit Utah's playmaking ability. They don't have a lot of speed. They don't have like that special playmaker that we've seen Utah have the last couple of years in the passing game this season. They don't have that big playmaker. Pittman was maybe supposed to be that guy, and he never really materialized, and then he got hurt. Sione Vaki's kind of that guy right now, but it's 2 weeks. And how much can you rely on him to be out there? And this goes back to Oregon, the question about the good start offensively for Oregon. Like if Oregon can come out and score on 3 of its first 4 possessions, whether it be 2 touchdowns and a field goal or ideally 3 touchdowns, and all of a sudden Utah looks up at the scoreboard and goes, wow, it's middle of the second quarter and we're down 17-3 or 17-7, a 2-score game here. That will force Utah to get away from, because I agree, Jared, like they're going to run the football. They're going to try and run the football, and that could force them to maybe get away from that a little bit and play into more of their weaker points of their offense than their backbone. They've always been able to run the football. They've always had good running backs. It seems like every year a running back gets hurt for them, and they've just got some dude waiting in the wings that steps in, and it's like, oh yeah, he's really good too. Here we go. And that's what's happened this season. And for Oregon, it's just you've got a game plan around their run game and make them throw the football. I think we're going to see a lot of one-on-one coverage, a lot of press coverage from Oregon in this one. Guys, loading up the box and just really daring Utah to air it out and throw it deep against Oregon secondary.
Throwing it deep is what you'd like to force them to do. They have a little bit of, I mean, it's not a Dalton Kincaid, certainly. But in terms of guys that can create mismatches and have some speed, like Money Parks is a guy that you go watch, and he's really explosive, and they get creative in terms of getting him at end arounds, getting the ball in space, taking advantage of that. Vaki, to me, is like a really pivotal part in this game because, to Matt's point, the offense does lack a little of that pass punch, but there's a reason that Barnes threw for so many yards last week, and a lot of the explosives were to him out of the backfield. He was really explosive, and I'll be curious to see kind of if they can expand his role and how Oregon defends him because this is a guy who, against USC, who has great athletes. I'm not saying that they're really well coached necessarily on defense. I'm not saying that they have better athletes in Oregon, but it's not like these are 2 and 3 star recruits. These are 4 and 4 star athletes out here, and Vaki was running away from those guys, right? So like it looks like some of that stuff translates, and I will be very curious to see how Oregon handles all of that. Again, I think I think the offense really is the story here. If Oregon can create some separation early and force Utah to get away from its run game and force it to become something where, to Matt's point, they have to try to stretch the field vertically. Like I'm skeptical of Utah's ability to do that consistently enough to rally and come back and win this game. But I just in general don't want to count out Utah based upon what we've seen this season. I intend to pick Oregon in this game, but Utes are a tough task no matter what, no matter any of the circumstances. You don't want to overlook this program.
I feel like this is a game where if Oregon wins it, it's going to be because of what they did in the first half. And they create a situation where Utah has to play from behind and trying to play catch up. And that, games are won or lost different parts of play. And I feel like just the hot start for Oregon could be the deciding factor of this one. If they can pull it off, and if they can't, we might be in a slugfest down to the wire. And it's hard to bet against Utah in Salt Lake City in a 1-score game at home. Like that's really hard to bet against. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up the second half of the Autzen Audibles podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. 3 questions in, 2 more to go.
Next one from @Hodges_Ryan. On a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you with the relatively low number of turnovers created by the defense? And what do you attribute that low number to? #Autzen Audibles. On a scale of 1 to 10, 3.5. It's not a huge worry for me.
Yeah.
I mean, turnovers are so random in football. Anybody who watches a lot of football goes, hey, like this game, or like look at Oregon from this perspective. Against Texas Tech, they forced 4 turnovers. The rest of the season, they forced 3. They forced 1 in conference play. Like it's just not a whole lot of rhyme and reason to that. Some of that obviously is opponent based. Is like Tyler Shuck was in a spot there where he had to try to make you think about those turnovers that were forced. Two of those came in the very end of the game where it was gut check time, and Shuck was in a position where he needed to. The last one obviously just needed to chuck it. The second one, great pressure from Dorless, but obviously there's a level of urgency from Shuck where he feels like he has to make a play, and so maybe he's a little bit more aggressive in his approach. Like that's the type of thing that goes into turnovers to me more than anything else. Is like how the opposing offense plays a big role in that too. Like this is why I thought the Washington State game presented an opportunity to force some turnovers because I figured Cam Ward would be in the mode he was in, where he's like, I've got to make a play happen. Like, we're not going to win this game unless I'm out there making plays happen. It's what we saw, frankly. I hate to bring it up, but Justin Herbert in the second half against the Chiefs of like, we have to make something happen. I'm going to force some things. And he threw the ball into some tough spots and there were turnovers. That's
Right.
more of what I see on the field in terms of how turnovers are created. I don't think there's like they're not calling the turnover defensive plays or they're just not doing this or that. Like, I think a lot of it is based upon the opportunities presented to you. And Oregon hasn't been presented with as many opportunities as you would expect in some of these games. Like you think about the plays they have made, it's been like Jaleel Florence is just right in the right spot, and Penix either Badunze runs the wrong route, slips coming out of his break, whatever it is, and it's just a wide open catch for Florence on the sideline. That's how turnovers are
Mhm.
typically forced. Some of them are pure aggression turnovers where you're getting upfield and you make the turnover happen. Frankly, it's surprising we haven't seen more of those considering the sack totals these last couple of weeks. But it only takes one play, and Bryson Barnes isn't the biggest guy, so maybe this is a week where you get home and you either force him to put a ball up in the air or you get home and knock the ball loose. I don't know, but I'm not super concerned. I would attribute the low number more to circumstance than anything else. And honestly, kind of like just the not being. Okay, they've had 7 this year. How many more like super close turnovers did they even have? Like, it's not like I don't think there's been like if you were to do this on an opportunity based percentage of like the rate of converting
Yeah.
turnovers, it doesn't feel like they're leaving a lot out there. Is my point.
I feel like every game there's a drop pick or something like that. Not a lot of fumbles. I don't know, like against Washington State, like Nico Reed really had an opportunity. Against Colorado, Jamal Hill and Kyrie Jackson both dropped an interception. Um, I'm not worried either. I completely agree with you, Eric. Right now, I'm at a 3 on the scale. I also think it's a lot about the types of quarterbacks they've played and the types of offenses they've played. Like the quarterbacks that they've played this season have been pretty darn good. Shador Sanders, Cam Ward, and Michael Penix. And I know they got to Shuck, but Shuck is an average Power 5 quarterback. Like these offenses also don't really put the ball in jeopardy. Even like Stanford's offense doesn't really put the ball in jeopardy. It's these quick hitters where you give the ball in space to people and hopefully they make you miss tackles. But I think it'll come. And if it doesn't, it's fine. I also think it's a little bit of the luck of the draw. Like Oregon's had a lot of sacks this season. I think they've only had one forced fumble sack, technically two with the Bryce Betcher one, but the other one was Jamal Hill, where they did actually force a turnover there against Shuck. But there's been a lot of opportunities to bring down people and just have the ball come out. And it just hasn't happened. And that's credit to the ball security of the quarterbacks. But like on Brandon Dorles's missed sack on Saturday, that was a huge swipe down, big old bear claw down there to try to punch the football out. Didn't happen. So I'm at a 3. Really not worried about it.
Yeah, not worried. It's gonna happen at some point. If they were giving up big chunks of yards and a bunch of points and they weren't creating turnovers, like sure, let's get worried. But they're getting stops. They get a lot of 3 and outs. They force their opponent to punt. They've won on 4th down a couple times. Like turnovers would be great. It'd be awesome. But there are a lot of other concerns that you could have with this defense than the lack of turnovers. And they're still averaging like, 15 or 16 points a game right now? Like when your defense is that good, like it'd be nice to have turnovers, but you're getting the ball anyways. So,
yeah.
I acknowledge so that it is a low number. So like I get that fans are going to be
Absolutely.
aware of the fact that it's a lower number than you think, and that they've had one
Mhm.
turnover force since Texas Tech, I think. No, they've had more because they had a couple against Hawaii, but it's not been very much in conference. But I think it's just been the one at Washington. I just don't think it's not like the team's not making 3-point shots. Why aren't they making 3-point shots? Because the team can't make 3-point shots. It's more of like the opposing team is not giving you opportunities really to make those plays. Is more of how I see it in terms of just. I just don't think there's been that many opportunities. I mean, there probably have been a couple each game, but I don't know. I'm not.
It would just there's not a lot. Opposing teams aren't really taking too many shots, but there's like a handful of ones, like the three I mentioned, where it's like that would add to the list. Some people probably would feel a little bit better with whatever Oregon's
Yeah,
turnovers are,
I
plus
mean,
3 or 4, rather
even
than what it is now.
even Nico's was like that would have been a really good play if Nico had made that. He's
Yep.
a bigger
Yeah,
receiver,
100%.
basically kind of just pulls it over the top from him, based from a size perspective.
Mhm.
Good position though. All right, last one from @Ross_Maselich. More than halfway through the year, how would you assess how the new position coaches have done this far? He also adds on-field and recruiting. #Autzen Audibles. Thanks, Ross. Um, I still think the offensive line, which probably most weeks gets my lowest offensive game grade, but I still think they're playing at a really high level, especially with all the new pieces. And sure, there are things that you can quibble with here in terms of there's been some unsavory plays where there's touchdowns wiped off because a guy is an RPO and a guy leaves early and ends up downfield, and rather than put the ball in Bucky's stomach, Bo pulls it and throws it, and it becomes an illegal man downfield. You still see that penalty. I think that's tough. The false starts and holds, some of those are tough. Sometimes on the like one of the holds, the one on the ultimate ended up being a touchdown to Troy that got pulled off on the Ajani hold was like Bo ran like 20 yards one direction, 20 yards the other. That's like really difficult for an offensive lineman to stay engaged there and not end up holding with all of that change of direction. So it's like some of it's that. I just think in general the offensive line's played really well. I think Jackson Powers Johnson's been incredible. I think the guards have both quietly been better than I had expected, just because those are players who kind of had some up and down play in the past. Not that it's been perfect. So yeah, I think Alik Terry's done a great job with this offensive line. And then recruiting, I don't think there's any question it's been good. It's always interesting when a guy comes in without a ton of history in this part of the country. I know Alik was here previously under previous staff for a couple of years, so there were some of those connections. But 3 of the 4 commitments are basically in-state kids. I mean, Fox Crater is in Vancouver. That's basically right over the border. That's basically an Oregon kid. And then obviously the 2 in-state kids with Ferguson and Brooks. So
Mhm.
that's good. And then, of course, you can't complain when he goes across the country and pulls in one of the best offensive tackles from literally a hotbed that every SEC school is trying to pull kids from. So I think that's gone great. And I guess I'll stop talking and let you guys talk more about Chris Hampton. But I think very highly of how both of them have done so far.
Yeah, I think highly of how Terry has done as well. It's a difficult position to coach, and it's even more difficult when you had a guy leave, and now it's a whole new group. Replacing 4 starters is very hard, but Hampton, I think, has done fine. I think it always helps when your safeties are just better than they were the season before. But if you look at guys like Steve Stevens and the development he's had over the course of the offseason, after Matthew Pallett's left and Chris Hampton came in, I think that's been a true statement or a testimony to Hampton and his ability to develop secondary players. He did a very good job at Tulane in doing it. And recruiting wise, this is a good safety class for Oregon. I brought in some dudes. Kingston Lopa, I think, is the highest rated commit for Oregon as a safety. And I think that'll be a spot where he does well. I don't think that's a spot where you absolutely must have some dudes going into every recruiting class, because safety is, I don't know, it's just one of those positions where you can rotate some guys in and out. But always helps to have an elite safety, and I think Hampton and the game plan that he's delivered for Tyship Johnson and Evan Williams and Steve and BA when he was still with the team, I think it's been more than good enough. I'm excited to see what he does in over this offseason and going into year 2.
I don't have much more to say because you guys have covered it. I think both guys have done a good job. I think both guys have inherited really talented units, and they're kind of doing what would be expected of them, new or not. I think we'll see what happens when these position groups, these position rooms have some turnover, and we see the new faces roll in, the guys that these coaches have recruited to bring in, and do they fit? And these coaches have brought in guys themselves that are playing in this game. That has to be acknowledged. They've added portal guys to the mix, which are players they targeted. But the true answer to this question won't be known for 2 or 3 more years, I think, of recruiting and player development and so forth. All right. That's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for submitting your questions. We will be back tomorrow on Tuesday with a recap of Dan Lanning's Monday night press conference plus player interviews. We have efforted to get Steve Bartle from the Ute Zone on the podcast. We're waiting to hear back of a time that works there. And then hopefully we get that locked in. And then on Thursday, we will have our game preview and game picks for this week, leading up to Oregon at Utah, 12:30 kick on Fox, which, by the way, Gus and Joe Klatt, they've made the change. They're coming to Salt Lake City. So the big number 1 crew for Fox will be calling the game. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.